Hey everybody, Mike Griffith here along with Connor Riley. We're here for the Ingles on the Beat segment. We're live in front of Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall. If you listen closely, you might get to hear Kirby Smart yelling at his troops. Connor, he uses the loudspeaker. Dan Lanning, the defensive coordinator, doesn't. Thus, the other day when he spoke with the media, he was quite hoarse. So when Kirby speaks, the whole field listens, and he's out there right now directing them. First day in full pads. We got a heat index here approaching 100 degrees, and those guys are in full pads. They've been training. They've been waiting for this day. And Connor, early on in our practice observations, some good news. I guess I'll start with the most popular guys. Amir White no longer in a knee brace, and Matt Landers has moved back ahead of Lawrence Cager at wide receiver, what looks to be a real battle for J.J. Holloman's starting job.
Yeah, I think wide receiver, you're going to see a lot of different guys rotate at the position. I think the longer you might see a guy like Tyler Simmons stay with the first team or Demetrius Robertson stay with the first team, I think that might indicate more who is very safe and strong in their sort of starting spots, just given they have so many unproven guys that they're all going to want to get a look. Like it wouldn't shock me at some point in the next week or so if, George Pickens and Dominic Blaylock are working up there, if Trey Blunt and Kearis Jackson are working up there. So I think, you're going to continue to see a rotation, but the longer maybe a Tyler Simmons or a Demetrius Robertson stay in those top spots sort of indicate where the real standing is with these guys.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that's the real standing is that they've already proven themselves as blockers. They've been through spring drills. They've been through the course of an entire season. Certainly Tyler Simmons. I think Tyler's a stone-cold lock to start. He's proven a lot playing last year in a shoulder brace. And remember, those guys, Kirby gets so excited about the downfield blocking. Charlie Warner at tight end as well. I mean, to me, these are the tent stakes of the Georgia offense, along with the Great Wall. And speaking of the Great Wall, it's lining up exactly like we thought it would, with Andrew Thomas at left tackle, Solomon Kinley at left guard. In the middle, you got Trey Hill at right guard, Big Ben Cleveland, and right tackle Isaiah Wilson. Cade Mays fighting in there, right guard. Remember, he can swing to the tackle. And Jamari Salyer out there at tackle. But, Connor, you had an observation on Jamari Salyer, a big, strong guy, but maybe not moving as fast as some of the other guys?
Yeah, I don't want to say he's out of shape, but he looks a little bit heftier, a little bit heavier, a little bit less sculpted than maybe some of the other guys on that team. Now, granted, guys like Ben Cleveland, Isaiah Wilson, those guys are a chiseled 320 pounds. Like there's not a whole lot of fat on them, whereas, Jamari, when he came in, he was one of those, and this is a popular thing for Georgia when they recruit guys. They like to recruit them bigger. That way they can sort of slim them down and slender them down. And Jamari, I don't know if he's carrying a lot of bad weight or what it is, but he just look-wise, getting off the bus, he doesn't exactly look like the Ben Clevelands, Isaiah Wilsons, Cade Mazes right now.
Yeah, and he's only been on campus for a year. Remember, he didn't go through spring when he came in last year, and that was why he was behind Cade in the first place. So he's still catching up, but you get the feeling after a really challenging fall camp, which this will be. I mean, Kirby Smart's motto is do more. You can bet they're going to do more. Looking in the secondary, no surprises there yet. When we talk about J.R. Reed and Richard LeCounte at safety, we talk about Tyson Campbell at cornerback along with Eric Stokes. But Tyreek Stevenson is a guy yesterday that Dan Lanning spoke a lot about.
Yeah, you had a story on him today. Stevenson, he's an interesting guy. He is as well built. A lot of these corners are these outside guys. Sometimes they don't come in, very chiseled. They haven't lifted a lot of weights in high school. They haven't needed to. He is just fully chiseled out already, and you can tell he's already taken advantage of that Georgia weight room, and he is going to be a guy who, might just be too talented to keep off the field, whether they play him at a corner position, maybe it's star, maybe it's safety. At some point this year, I think we're going to hear Tyreek Stevenson's name called.
Yeah, no doubt. And a lot of these teams that play 4 and 5 receiver sets, sometimes you rotate those corners in, and I think number 7 is a guy that's impressed them. Lanning said he's made a lot of plays in the spring that we didn't necessarily hear a lot about, but you can tell Kirby Smart likes him, and anytime they're talking about a true freshman, they really like him a lot. Another guy they brought up is Old Hammerhead. Yep. We got a nickname already for Nolan Smith, and you wrote a story about him today.
Yeah, I had a story on Nolan today. He is a guy who, again, continuing from his spring practice, he's impressed a lot of people, and it's not so much, just that freak pass rusher ability, which I think a lot of people would maybe like to see from him early on. It's, his work in the run game, really, and his, just work ethic. Sorry, having a tough time with words. It's really hot out here. His work ethic is something that, Justin Toe, when he did a really deep dive on him earlier this summer, his work ethic was something a lot of people have raved about, and that's been the number one thing coming up. He continues to work hard. He continues to push guys in that room, and as a whole, I think he's going to end up making everyone in there better just simply because he's not going to take a rep off.
Connor, we're going to have to remember this the next time we write about a Georgia guy jumping off sides in a September game when it's 100 degrees and they're in full equipment. We can't even say the right words, and they're supposed to remember cadence counts with a 350-pound guy looking to knock them on their butt. So, no, I think the last 2 days there's been a lot of information that's come out. Obviously, the Brenton Cox deal, and I haven't really had a chance to talk about this. I know Brandon has, and I know I wrote about it, but my takeaway from this as Brenton Cox moves forward is he's a guy that just got off on the wrong foot, and it just never got better. And this is a situation where, even though Georgia's very deep at the position, you never want to lose a 5-star, but I do think this is a situation where everybody can benefit. I think Brenton Cox probably needs a fresh start somewhere else. I think Georgia's got enough depth, and there's been enough history with Brenton Cox. He was a little bit in the doghouse after this spring when he was arrested on the misdemeanor marijuana possession charge, less than 1 ounce found in his dorm room, 420. And then last season, he had the 2 incidents. First with DeAndre Walker, the shoving match after the senior tried to coach him up for missing an assignment. He shoves the guy back. I can shove Connor. He's not going to shove me. See, he gets it. The older guy shoves the younger guy. He's seen that. But seriously, he had trouble taking that coaching. And then Connor, we saw later in the season against Alabama, that might have cost Georgia the SEC championship.
And he's not the only outside linebacker to struggle in that game, but you look at him specifically, he was the one who lost contain on that last Jalen Hurts touchdown pass, and it is something, he struggled with all season, it seems like. Jonathan Ledbetter explained, Walker was just trying to coach him up and sort of, hey, this is why it's important to keep contained, and Cox really didn't want to hear it from him. And, this spring after the suspension and whatnot, there was a pre-scrimmage practice. We were down there taking pictures. I'm walking up and down the sidelines just trying to get shots or whatever. And I'm taking pictures of the outside linebacker while they're going through drills. And Brenton Cox sees me doing this, and he's sitting up there, posing, throwing up a peace sign. And I'm just, I was really taken aback by it because, I get that it's hot and practices are long and you're going through drills and it might not seem that important in the moment. But, Kirby requires complete focus, complete dedication in practice. And if you're going to be, I don't want to say goofing around, but not really totally focused on what you're doing at practice, that's not a good sign from a Kirby Smart program where he wants practice to be more difficult than the games more often than not.
Well, I'll say this. I'm guilty of this. I hope I don't get Lawrence Cager in trouble, but he looked serious, and I said, come on, Cager, have a little fun. It's fan day. I mean, I had to coach the guy into smiling on a fan day. I mean, listen, they are that locked in here. And that's really what it's all about at Georgia. I noticed that last year when I came in. I mean, the mission statement is so clear. The focus, the guys are so driven. Sometimes you have a hard time trying to get these guys to loosen up for interviews. Thank goodness we got Solomon Kinley. He's such a big teddy bear. He can't help it. He's always smiling and laughing. But apparently on the field, he's a whole different animal, quite literally. If you looked at some of his pictures on Instagram, he labels animals on his picture because he does have that mindset. He's a guy that's going to the NFL. Connor, Solomon Kinley may be the number 1 guard in the country. But the point is, there is a lot of focus here. And Kirby realizes that there needs to be. There's just not much margin for error when you're competing for a national championship. Right. And all you got to do is look at what happened with Alabama. I'm on Twitter, and Clemson fans like to give me a hard time because, I point out that Alabama had historically the most dominant season in SEC history. I've covered the league since '93. I don't take that lightly. When you beat everybody by 23 points or more, and it hasn't been done in any league since the 1800s, I think that's a hell of an achievement. And then they ran into Georgia. And Georgia and Kirby threw a game plan down, and Clemson had the personnel to kind of emulate that in the game and, got an early pick 6, got the momentum, and give Trevor Lawrence and Clemson credit. They ran away with it. But the point of it is Alabama was a little bit off at the start of that game, and they ended up losing, 44-16. So moments like this when we're talking about focus, and I just put a practice report up where Kirby Smart talks about wanting these guys in 100-degree heat, Connor, instead of practicing in the morning or night.
Yeah, and to the whole Alabama thing, Saban mentioned there were a lot of distractions going around during that time in the run up to that game, and that's just something where in those big games, in those big moments, something like remembering to keep contained and set the edge, that just comes down to a focus thing more often than not. And you saw last year with Cox, he may not have always been focused and 100% locked in, and I think that's something again you saw this spring, and you wonder how receptive at a certain point Cox was to hard coaching, and maybe, because there's been some clarifications of was he dismissed or is it a mutual parting of the ways? One way or another, Georgia, and the coaching staff did not seem to be satisfied with what they were getting out of Brenton Cox, regardless of the 5-star status that he had coming into the program.
Yeah, quick anecdote. When I covered Michigan State, they recruited a guy out of Georgia, out of the Atlanta area, named Montez Sweat. Mm-hmm. He was also a very good basketball player, but they recruited him as a tight end, and when they signed him, I think he weighed 235. They get him up there at Michigan State. They grow him into this 285-pound speed rush end, and he was slated to start. Actually had an impact in a couple games, but then he had some issues, some test issues, some substance test issues, and he ends up getting kicked out of the program.
Yep.
Transplants at Mississippi State, first-round draft pick.
Got it back together.
I wouldn't be surprised, Connor, if the same thing happened for Brennan Cox somewhere.
And, this isn't to say that Cox doesn't deserve a second chance to go shine somewhere else. He does. It's just, it looks like things weren't really working out.
Well, and who are you going to take? And who are you going to take off the field? Look at who they just signed at outside linebacker.
Exactly. And I wrote yesterday. It's still a loaded, even without Cox. It is still a room that has a lot of talent from a recruiting standpoint. And it's a room that has a lot of upside. It's just it's a lot of upside. It's not a lot of proven guys in that room. And with or without Cox, that statement is still true. And this now might free up more reps to get guys like Nolan Smith, Jermaine Johnson more of a look and more prepared to contribute right away this season. Whereas if you have Cox in there and he's not giving 110%, that's not just taken away from himself. That's taken away from the guys behind him who are trying to get on the field, and coaches are trying to get a look at what Cox is potentially giving them.
Well, you said it, Connor, and it's got to be that way, and Kirby's got to coach him like he coaches everybody else, no matter what number's on his jersey. It's 2 number ones, as Connor pointed out, that have transferred. I don't like that number in college sports. Connor, what kind of questions do we have? You're watching the Ingles on the Beat segment, by the way. I'm Mike Griffith. This is Connor Riley. We're here live in Athens in front of the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall, Georgia practicing behind. Any questions on Facebook for us yet?
Oh, there's a certain single-digit number player on offense we're getting a lot of questions asked about. He's had an injury history, and we actually do have an update. I'm going to let you give the update on this one.
Well, earlier in practice, Amir White spotted without a knee brace. He's still doing everything. He's still on schedule, as Kirby Smart would say. I guess the question, and I'm sure he'll get a few tackles in today. They're in full pads. They'll do limited scrimmage action, but Connor, I can't imagine him getting more than 5 or 6 carries in the first scrimmage of the year.
No, and to this point, Kirby has reiterated this there, especially compared to last year. They're going to take things slow and be cautious with Zamir because, I think they know, and I think most fans would agree with this. You shouldn't need Amir White to beat Vanderbilt, Murray State, Arkansas State, probably even Notre Dame. You need him to be fully healthy, fully ready to go by the time you're playing that SEC championship game, by the time you're potentially playing those college football playoff games. So you don't want to rush him back now and worry about him breaking down and having that knee or knees really bother him later in the season. You want him to be just fully ready to go come those big November games, which is really what's going to separate Georgia from a good season and a potentially great season.
Well, and it works also because you're trying to get Kenny McIntosh ready for some work. I mean, when we look at the Georgia backfield, you've got DeAndre Swift and James Cook. They're kind of the flyers. I look at these guys as sweeps and catching the passes and running routes. Now, that's not to say they can't run between the tackles, Connor, but I see them in shotgun, and I see them being a little bit more versatile. And then between the tackles, you look at Brian Herrien and Zamir White or Kenny McIntosh. So by taking it easy with Zamir, you're also getting Kenny a little bit of work. You're divvying those reps up. Now, like you said, when push comes to shove, and I think maybe a little sooner, though. I think October, you try and get Zamir. You go to Tennessee that first week after a bye week. Maybe that's a week you get him 6 or 7 carries if you're beating Tennessee by a couple of touchdowns in the second half. What else we got out there on Facebook?
We got a question about Jermaine Johnson and Nolan
Smith. Yeah.
How much do you think we'll see them? Where will Nolan fall in line? Will he be used situationally, or is he going to be a full guy ready to start right away?
Well, I don't think he's going to be a full guy ready to start right away. It's funny, though. We did get 2 different answers. I asked Kirby Smart. I don't know if you noted that. Hey, how are you going to do the linebackers? Are you going to do by committee? He goes, well, whoever's the most prepared is going to be out there as much as possible. Then the next couple days later, Dan Lanning says, we got guys that can do different things for different packages. So in Kirby's mind, if Kirby had it his way, he'd be able to put, the same guys out there, the same alphas out there. And really, I don't think it's that there's not alphas, that there's not enough alphas, Connor. I think there's too many. I think you want to find ways to put Nolan and Jermaine out there.
Well, an example like Monty Rice gave, Adam Anderson is a guy who who just because of his size and his lack of weight and bulk, may not be a guy that can hold up in the running game for 3 downs. But that guy's got speed to burn off the edge, and he's a guy, I find it hard to imagine that they're not going to want to put him out there in 3rd and long or obvious pass passing down situations, just where he puts his hand in the dirt, he gets by a guy and puts pressure on the quarterback. And you like to think that Nolan Smith is maybe a guy who could do that right away as well. I'll be interested, to watch how much Nolan is involved on those sort of rundowns, because I think that's going to be the key to where to watch guys in terms of who develops into that every down player. Because if coaches are trusting you to play on rundowns, all those guys in that room have enough athleticism to really get after the passer on third down.
Yeah, I don't see Monty Rice coming off the field much, or J.R. Reed, but you talk about a guy like Adam Anderson, and maybe when you play that read option quarterback with speed, now you've got a linebacker that can run him down. You play that spread team where you want to have a little bit faster guy who's a little bit better in space. It's almost like Georgia's got the answer for you, regardless of the formation of the personnel that you trot out there.
Yeah, we got another question here on Demetrius Robertson. How is he looking? He's noticeably bigger. He has, even from the end of spring and into last season, he's a guy who certainly in the upper chest area has put on a little bit more weight, looks a little bit thicker, which I think is a good thing for him, because we heard a year ago the reason he just wasn't getting on the field was just it wasn't because of his skills so much as a wide receiver, but just because he wasn't the blocker that a Tyler Simmons or Riley Ridley was. And now this year, I think he's taken that to heart and really made it an effort to sort of be a more physical guy, a guy who can be in there on running downs to still contribute to a team, because one of the bigger things that might get lost in the Holloman discussion, he was a really good run blocker last year for them, and there were a lot of big DeAndre Swift runs, especially late in the season, where Holloman was the guy springing that run to turn it from a 15 to 20 yard run to turning it into a 40 and 50 yard run.
Yeah, and in all fairness to Demetrius Robertson, remember he was injured at Cal. He came to Georgia after spring drills, so he had
this time a year ago, he was on campus, but it was not known that he was going to be eligible this year. So.
Yeah, he hadn't had a whole off season of workouts, so he wasn't physically ready to compete. Yes, he had the speed, but to your point, he didn't have the physicality or the blocking technique. I think he learned pretty quick that Kirby Smart's serious about the downfield blocking. I'll say this about D-Rob. We're hearing good things, but I'm not hearing like lockdown, he's the man. I think there's still something to be proved for Demetrius Robertson in fall camp, Connor. I mean, we had this conversation earlier today on BA's show. I couldn't tell you right now who the leading receiving is. My guess would be DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, I mean, DeAndre Swift is a guy. Charlie Warner could be another guy. Eli Wolf, it wouldn't surprise me either, because those guys, sort of more known commodities, were still at wide receiver in a Georgia uniform. There's just so many guys we don't really know.
Well, Tyler Simmons had 9 catches, and that's the leading
returning wide receiver from a year ago. And Simmons, I think he's going to bypass that pretty quickly this year. But there are a lot of guys and there are a lot of unknowns, and Pickens and Blaylock are guys who get asked about a lot. They have a lot of upside. The question will be, how soon can they get on the field and sort of get their reps in? Because, as James Coley has liked to say pretty often yesterday in his media interview, we're just in jerseys right now.
That's right. I got a story up on what Coley said specifically about Pickens and Blaylock on DawgNation. If you want to check that out, I put the question to him, how much do you simplify to get these guys on the field? He had a pretty interesting answer you're going to want to check out on DawgNation. You're watching Ingles on the Beat with Mike Griffith and Connor Riley. What else we got, Connor? We got to wrap it up here.
We got to wrap it up pretty quickly. Let's see. Is Otis Reese pushing Richard LeCount for playing time?
I haven't seen that yet, but honestly, we only see the start of practice. Yeah. I think today is when real pushes begin. Now, we've seen some guys trade places in the rotation. As I said, Matt Landers and Cager have been kind of trading back and forth at number 1 at outside receiver. We've yet to see Pickens or Blaylock elevate past the third string with the receiver. But today in pads is a day, Connor, where I think people can really make a move and impress Kirby Smart.
Right, and with regards to Reese and LeCount, I think LeCount is going to be the quote-unquote starter in games, but I think much like you sometimes see with the pass rushers we talked about earlier, guys like Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, you might see Otis Reese rotate in a little bit for Richard LeCount, because Reese is significant. He's about 4 inches, about 30 pounds bigger than Richard LeCount is, and just naturally because of physics, he's going to be a better tackler and a more sure tackler because of that. So I think Reese, I don't know if he's as good as LeCount will be in coverage, but certainly in rundowns, I would expect to see a guy as big as Reese is to find his way onto the field.
And they're going to make some changes at that star position, also based on the personnel. Whether it's Mark Webb, who's running first team right now, who I think kind of leans towards the coverage skills. Devad Wilson, maybe the more versatile of the guy. So you're going to see different guys in different packages against different teams. The good news is Georgia's just incredibly deep, incredibly loaded, and so far incredibly focused. Do we have anything else from the DawgNation Facebook page gallery before we go?
a lot of questions on the defensive line, and I'm really not sure how much we can answer about that until we see them in a game. Because again, maybe like wide receiver a little bit, there are a lot of bodies. But, with at least defensive line, Tyler Clark's going to give you something. Jordan Davis is going to give you something, and a lot of coaches are talking about, he can be a really good player for Georgia. It's just, can he keep himself in shape and keep himself in check physically to sort of contribute there?
Yeah, no doubt. And you wonder a little bit about what's going to happen as far as how much of an impact Malik Herring can make. I mean, he had a really good offseason. We've heard a lot about Justin Young now. He's a fifth-year senior. Is he ready to contribute?
Yep.
Keep an eye on Julian Rochester. That's the injury to keep an eye on. He's coming off a knee. Kirby said he wasn't quite ready to be 100% in contact, but he was a guy that he thought would be cleared and would be ready to play by the opener. So we're going to call that a wrap here from outside of Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall. Again, we got about 100-degree heat index here. Those guys in the pads got a lot tougher than Connor and I. I hope you have enjoyed the production. If you've got more questions for us, feel free to drop them in the chat, and one of us will get back, if not both of us. And certainly check out our DawgNation forum. I weigh in there about as much as I can. So for Connor Riley, this is Mike Griffith. Everybody, have a great Tuesday afternoon.